I'm going to talk to you a little bit about evaluation studies, which are very, very common in educational research. At some level and with a varying degree of quality, a lot of what we do in education is evaluated in some way. And some of these actually do become formal research studies. There's a distinction, though, between the evaluation of policies, which look at the fidelity and outcomes based on compliance with some kind of policy, and those which look at the fidelity to and the outcomes of an actual program. Policy evaluations can lead to revision of policy and can look at the effectiveness, efficiencies, and even hidden costs. And so a study like this would be one that looks at a policy on, for example, standard student attire, and whether this policy is helping with discipline or behavior issues at a school at all, how the parents like it, how the students like it, teachers, etc. So that would be an evaluation of a policy. Program evaluations are usually summative, and which is kind of sad, but they take a look at the effectiveness of a particular program or project. In some projects, we actually have the incredible luxury of having a formative evaluation process, which means the evaluators are providing information throughout the project so that it can be steered and revised as it unfolds. I had the experience of running a very large statewide project. Excuse that interruption. I was talking about a project that I ran, a statewide project for professional development years ago, and right from the get-go we were able to hire the evaluators to be part of the team that was planning the whole project. And it was just incredible to have their ongoing help as issues came up or they noticed things doing classroom observations and different things like that. And it was an incredible luxury. But in both types of evaluation studies, the audience is very much in mind, the stakeholders. You always have either one group of stakeholders or several groups of stakeholders who have expectations and needs out of the evaluation. And sometimes this is a funding source. So the evaluation has to address the things that matter to that group, and that always kind of shapes it a little bit. There are also huge variations in designs for evaluation. Be sure to look at the examples in your textbook. Currently, there's a huge trend in our country to try to evaluate projects in terms of return on investment. And that's a term that we have borrowed from the business world. The problem is that it's very, very difficult in education to put a dollar amount on the outcomes that we get from programs. Yet stakeholders more and more are asking for a list of what they're getting for their money, and that really is difficult to do, and it's a huge national problem right now that a lot of us are working on and discussing. But you've either got macro types of designs with large-scale data sets, and these are the ones that tend to have an economic model brought into them. Or they're smaller and they're field-based and they're very specific on a smaller project. So that's the big distinction. Evaluations are used for a lot of the same reasons that teachers evaluate student work. You're judging a project against a standard to try and sometimes come up with its value, or sometimes evaluation is done on a product that's purchased. And then someone is making decisions about whether to expand or stop or revise or just continue with the status quo. And so evaluations are always, always, always very contextual. You may be using the best thing since sliced bread for a reading intervention program in one school, but in another school, in a different context with different students, that successful program may not be the best thing for those students. And very often an evaluation is done or mandated by those with an agenda. They're trying to either garner support or opposition to a program. So you always need to look at, when you're looking at evaluation type of research, you need to be looking at why the evaluation was done and what the audience is. The analysis is very often formative, if you've got that luxury. And that kind tends to be very heavily qualitative. And it looks at the processes that are being used and really deep, rich information about the contextual influences. I'm working currently on one evaluation where we are using a lot of case studies because they illustrate what has happened within the project. And that's been very helpful to look at situational differences between schools. Summative evaluations, though, tend to look at the outcomes, and these are the ones where you're trying to look at kids' test scores or their homework return rate or discipline changes in the dean's office or things like that. And some of these summative ones, summative is usually used when you're evaluating a program or a product, and they can even become kind of quasi-experimental and use randomized experimental design types of things in some cases. There are pros and cons, obviously, or at least things to look out for when you're reading about evaluation studies. The evidence that's used is very much a function of what the stakeholders expect. And as an evaluator, you've got a professional responsibility to provide what the stakeholders are asking you to provide, and yet to do it in an ethical and honest way. And that can sometimes be hard. There are usually these external requirements for an evaluation, and as I mentioned before, we're very much looking at a lot of cost-effectiveness studies right now. Some of the problems that you run into with evaluation research, a poor quality evaluation can really cause a lot of problems. Saying that something is wonderful and not limiting it to a context or picking and choosing so that it looks wonderful can really cause problems in the educational world, and we end up with programs and projects that really aren't benefiting students, but somewhere there was some evidence produced that this is a great thing. And I'm sure each of you have experienced that in your educational careers. Sometimes the findings are either misunderstood by those who are making decisions, or they're actually misused. And as your educational career unfolds, you will run into this, and it's a very frustrating experience. And last of all, if an evaluation study does not address the stakeholders, that should be a big red flag. Someone is always asking for this evaluation, and that really shapes what an evaluation can do. There is a Joint Committee on Standards for Educational Evaluation, and the value of that is that this committee has determined 4 standards that all evaluation research should be judged against. First of all, does the evaluation meet the needs of the stakeholders in a practical and timely manner? That's what we call utility. Does it do what it says, or do what the evaluation was asked to do? Second, is the evaluation realistic, possible, economically viable, necessary? And that's what we call a feasibility standard. Third, it needs to be conducted ethically, legally, and with professional regard for the participants and for the facilitators of this program. And that's what we call propriety. Basically, it's how you treat people when you're doing an evaluation of the project or the program. And finally, is it technically accurate so that effectiveness really can be determined, where the right analyses used, the right types of data gathered and analyzed, so that it's an accurate and honest report. So that, in a nutshell, is evaluation research.